A cautious tremor runs through every unguarded syllable, as though each utterance were a spark that might ignite the very embers meant to remain buried. Language often carries the guise of connection, sharing thoughts, tapping into ideas, broadcasting intentions. But under this rare convergence, speech can transform into a wild root that tangles the flow of inner guidance, propagating echoes that choke the tender shoots of insight. When the messenger star aligns with the core of our central luminary, the resonance shifts into a frequency that bends meaning like heat over desert sands, turning what should illuminate into a veil of noisy distortion. Has anyone paused to consider how stillness might serve as a sanctuary, a silent field where latent patterns can coalesce without risking premature exposure? In this threshold moment, restraint becomes the vessel that preserves the fragile glow of what is being gestated, safeguarding the essence until it reaches full clarity. A torrent of words can singe the very ember poised to ignite a deeper shift, sending that subtle unfolding veering off course. In this moment, any clamorous ripple risks redirecting the trajectory that was moments from crystallizing. A quietly pivotal juncture lies on June 3rd, yet few will sense its arrival. Something singular anchors that date, soon to be uncovered if attention holds. Since today's charge is restraint, perhaps it's worth pondering which thoughts have hovered unspoken in the mind's periphery. Could a soft admission find its way into the comments? Or will the hush itself reveal what needs to emerge? What's coming next might just be the missing piece you didn't know you were looking for. Hit subscribe, because the next message wasn't meant to be missed. The wave hasn't reached the shore yet. That's the strange part. This stillness isn't an ending, it's the pause before something sharper cuts through. There's a strange permission in today's air, as if existence itself is holding its breath, offering a final moment to shed something before a new rhythm takes over. Some choose silence in these thresholds, not out of fear, but recognition. What if the very act of saying too much now scatters the signal that was forming? There's a number that sometimes shows up when systems reset themselves. 000. It doesn't carry meaning in the usual way. It's not an answer, it's a blank field. And somehow it syncs perfectly with this invisible hush that's stretched across the sky. Now here's where things get odd. This energy is not just marking an ending. It's whispering the coordinates of something hidden ahead. Could it be that June isn't just a new chapter, but a test of how well we let go before we even arrive? There are moments when silence acts as a gatekeeper, subtle but firm. This isn't just another date marked on a calendar. The movement ahead carries a design, not of immediate action, but of quiet transmission. A kind of pulse is being embedded beneath surface awareness, not to be announced, but to be absorbed. It's strange how some signals don't enter through the ears or eyes, but through something softer, more porous. Tomorrow's alignment does just that. It slips beneath the noise and finds its place where it won't be noticed until it matters. The first stretch of June isn't random. It responds to what gets internalized now, not what gets broadcast. And here's the risk no one talks about. In the rush to be understood, something irreplaceable gets exposed to decay. Those who let this message take root privately will act when it's time. Not because they were told, but because they remembered. Have you ever noticed how the loudest people rarely see it coming? Some cycles bring clarity like a mirror. Others, like this one, act more like a lens, bending and enlarging whatever enters the frame. Right now, a precise alignment is creating that kind of lens. Not just an internal one, but a field-wide amplifier that catches anything vocalized and shoots it across invisible corridors, echoing into both higher frequencies and nearby currents. It's not only about what is spoken into the unknown, but what gets absorbed into the atmospheres of those who linger nearby. And here's where the danger hides. Some receivers distort, not out of malice necessarily, but out of unresolved longing or the impulse to shape what was never theirs to carry. The most vulnerable part of a vision is its first breath outside the mind. Exposure too early invites mutation. Its rhythm shifts, its texture alters, and the originator may find themselves estranged from what once felt sacred. Ever notice how some of the strongest ideas dissolve the moment they're named aloud? When something is spoken before it's settled, it becomes porous. The boundaries around a vision, once sturdy in silence, begin to soften, inviting influences that were never part of the original equation. It's rarely dramatic. Often it's quiet, unnoticed. A stray emotion, a flash of uncertainty from someone listening. But even unspoken tension can drift in, subtly altering momentum. One person's internal static can ripple through another's clarity without either one being aware. It's not always ill intent. More often it's unconscious, someone hearing forward motion and unintentionally echoing their own unresolved patterns into the space around it. This isn't about suspicion or secrecy, it's about resonance management. Just like physical health relies on clean air and water, conceptual integrity depends on an unclouded field. So here's something worth asking. How much of what seems off track is really the result of external thought forms that never belonged in the blueprint to begin with? Some phases aren't meant to be loud. They're crafted in stillness, where every element forms in its own timing, unhurried and unexposed. Right now, what's forming exists in a kind of etheric workshop, delicate, unfinished, not yet hardened into shape. The wisest motion is minimal, almost invisible, like heat rising without flame, not out of fear, but out of care. Not everything gains strength through exposure. Some things mature behind a curtain, gathering clarity before they ever touch the surface. Celebration has its time, but in this interval, restraint becomes sacred. The quiet is not absence. It's a container, a membrane, a pulse beneath the noise that keeps what matters intact. And here's the paradox. Silence isn't closing a chapter, it's positioning one. Can silence actually say more than sound ever could? Or better yet, what if the most important things speak only after everything else has gone quiet? If something inside you felt still while watching this, it means you're aligning. Subscribe and stay close, because the transmission continues. There are stretches of time when the atmosphere goes unnaturally still, not empty, just dense with something waiting. If the internal compass feels jammed, if usual sparks don't light, there's no malfunction. It's alignment. Not the kind that resolves, but the kind that gathers. This isn't the climax of the cycle. It's the narrowing before the surge, the pressure drop before energy reconfigures. The stillness is deceptive. Not calm, but compression. The moment the celestial mechanics unfreeze, movement doesn't trickle in. It bursts, ideas erupt, patterns emerge, fragments click into place. And the signals? They won't knock politely. They'll slip in through nonlinear rotes, through symbols and half-sleep, through passing words not meant for the ear, but the deeper registers of intuition. Ever experienced a day where nothing made sense until everything did all at once? That's what this is preparing for. The question is, can the mind handle clarity arriving like fire after frost? Signals don't just appear, they land where space has been made for them. And in this cycle, space isn't physical, it's perceptual. Those who rush to fill the quiet with stimulation, streams of input, constant exchange, build a kind of static that drowns out what was never meant to shout. There's a certain type of message that refuses to compete for attention. It comes encoded, delicate, translated only through absence. The ones who've learned to pause without reaching will notice it first. There's a kind of knowing that doesn't announce itself. It hums underneath. And when it arrives, there's no second guessing. The body confirms it. The air changes. The path clarifies not through logic, but through resonance. That moment, the one when truth and timing lock into place, isn't chance, it's preparation. Ever wonder how some seem to catch what others never even knew passed through? Clarity doesn't always arrive dressed in language. Sometimes it slips in sideways, a flicker behind the eyes, a shift in breath, an image that lingers without context. What lands may not make linear sense, and that's fine. Some truths come as impressions, not instructions. But just as something real begins to surface, another force stirs, an urgency to explain, to clarify, to respond. A subtle push says, maybe just one post, one reply, one little statement to set the record straight. But pause here, because what feels like instinct might be the mask of reactivity. The mind, when confronted with unfiltered knowing, often scrambles for control. That scramble speaks in urgency. Real alignment moves quieter, more slowly. Ever noticed how the loudest voice in the room rarely belongs to wisdom? Something rare unfolds in this interval. The inner compass, the one beneath roles and routines, momentarily overrides the mental chatter. Doesn't last long, but it's enough to reroute momentum. The usual narrator, the one that thrives on rehearsed identity and external feedback, senses the shift and begins to panic. It pushes to reassert itself. A sudden need to post, to clarify, to prove something to someone who was never part of the journey. This isn't guidance, it's resistance. Silence becomes a mirror it cannot manipulate. In that mirror, performance has no place and control has no grip. And what emerges instead is unnerving for the ego. Its presence, stripped of audience. This isn't about becoming mute. It's about recognizing which part of the self demands to be heard the loudest. Isn't it strange how the moment quiet becomes fertile? The noise in the mind calls it dangerous? When internal quiet deepens, something primitive pushes back. Not with logic, but with static. Racing thoughts, imagined confrontations, emotional loops that spiral without destination. It's not wisdom trying to land. It's distraction disguised as urgency. And it always arrives just as the psyche starts to soften, just as presence begins to sharpen. What follows is discomfort, and that discomfort isn't the problem. It's the unveiling. Silence doesn't come empty. It carries reflection, but not a polished one. It brings the unedited version, the one that shows exactly what's being avoided. That part is never easy to look at, and that's the point. Most aren't resisting quiet. They're resisting what it amplifies. But staying with that feeling, without numbing, posting, explaining, or reacting, is a form of initiation. Isn't it fascinating how the moment things get real, the first instinct is to reach for distraction? If you understood even part of this, it means the signal is reaching you. Subscribe. The rest will make sense soon enough. There's something that only reveals itself on the far side of restraint. When silence isn't interrupted, when it's allowed to stretch beyond comfort, it begins to generate a different kind of awareness. Not insight in the usual sense, but a clarity that doesn't ask for validation. It sits quietly, undisturbed, but unmistakably real. And this is where most timelines diverge. Few remain long enough in that internal atmosphere to notice the shift. But for those who do, something begins to move, slowly, subtly. That movement reaches a focal point soon, not in the form of spectacle, but in the form of alignment. A series of interconnected events, small conversations, repeating symbols, perfectly timed intersections, will begin to echo. And this echo, it's the return of everything left unsaid. Everything preserved in silence. June 3rd marks that echo, not a climax, but a mirror. After all, when the cosmos whispers, are the loudest voices even listening? When stillness becomes an intentional act, when expression is withheld not from fear, but from inner precision, it leaves behind a signature the field cannot ignore. Something subtle begins to code itself into future events, imperceptible at first, but deeply formative. For some, what follows will feel like alignment clicking into place, an overdue message, an unexpected door, a shift that validates the silence kept. For others, it will be the opposite, an unease, a static in the timeline, as if something was supposed to land but changed trajectory. Not due to fate, but due to interference. The moment at hand isn't decorative, it's infrastructural. This is not the time for ritualized noise or forced intention. The space created now becomes the blueprint. Silence doesn't erase, it inscribes. And what isn't spoken into existence is still heard by the architecture of time. Ever wondered what gets written when the pen is passed from the hand to the unseen? June 3rd won't announce itself with spectacle. It arrives as a response, subtle but precise, to what's being shaped right now in the quiet. If current moments feel blank, suspended, devoid of obvious movement, it's because the shift underway isn't loud, it's foundational. Stillness doesn't mean absence. It means the framework is being restructured in silence. There's a version of being that forms without attention, without validation. It's the version that waters up potential without broadcasting its existence. No explanation, just trust and rhythm. And that rhythm creates a tone, a frequency that the future will recognize. What lands on June 3rd is the return tone, and it will harmonize only with what remained uncorrupted, unspoken, intact. The discipline of quiet isn't passive, it's generative. And maybe the real revelation isn't just what's to come, but noticing what was steering every thought while the surface was still. If you felt something here, like it was meant just for you, maybe it was. Subscribe. No need to explain it, just stay. Occasionally, internal architecture glitches, just enough to reveal what normally stays beneath conscious access. This moment carries that anomaly. A rare alchemy takes place where the usual filters dissolve and the base code of identity surfaces, not in words but in sensation. It's not a voice. It doesn't arrive through logic. It shows up as pressure with no source, as a tightness that doesn't belong to the body. The mind for a brief window becomes transparent. The emotional charge present isn't random. It's resonance from the root statement the life has been unconsciously orbiting. Not the affirmations crafted with care or the beliefs claimed aloud. The real drivers. And sometimes they're luminous. Other times they carry the echo of older pain. Something like, it never lasts, or visibility isn't safe. The signal doesn't speak, it pulses. And if something feels strange, familiar, or hauntingly neutral right now, pause, because that pulse is likely the sentence the rest of the story has been written around. There are rare intervals when the internal script, the one never spoken, yet endlessly obeyed, glimpses into visibility. It doesn't appear through effort. It emerges through stillness. During this window, what normally hides beneath the rhythm of thought begins to stir just beneath perception. A signal, not loud, not direct, but undeniable. The field softens, and in that softening, something encoded begins to pulse. Not every moment grants this access. It's short, measured in hours, not days. But while it lasts, something ancient and personal becomes traceable. It can't be chased. It has to be allowed. And the only way in is through vacancy, mental stillness so complete that the default noise of the psyche loses grip. That stillness functions like a passkey, unlocking not more information, but clarity. And in that clarity, the oldest thread, the one that's been weaving through every choice, can finally be touched. Has the mind ever gone quiet enough for the truth to speak without interruption? There's a point where the mind begins to protest. Restlessness creeps in, seeking escape routes through noise, movement, explanation. Some won't wait it out. They'll reach for distractions or attempt to narrate the unease away. But something happens just beyond that edge, just past the threshold where discomfort usually wins. That's where the architecture starts to shift, not dramatically but undeniably. And when the core imprint, the unspoken instruction behind old choices, becomes visible, the spell breaks. It no longer has to be followed. Silence won't offer new lines to recite. It's not interested in performance. What it offers instead is unfiltered recognition. And that kind of recognition? It doesn't just inform, it recalibrates. Isn't that where power actually begins? Not in knowing what to say next, but in no longer needing to say it? This isn't just an event in the sky. It's an internal combustion, one that doesn't destroy but purifies. Right now, cognition itself is entering a crucible, not brushing past it, not dancing around its edges, fully immersed, the realm of thought, calculation, language, everything the mind builds, passes directly through the epicenter of light. And this isn't symbolic in the poetic sense. It's mechanical in the spiritual sense. A convergence designed to strip away illusion, not through logic, but through exposure. And what gets exposed is often unexpected, because in the furnace, concepts melt. What survives isn't the theory, it's the essence. There's a reason this kind of moment doesn't happen often. Not every cycle offers the mind a chance to be recoded by direct contact with the source. But when it does, what returns isn't the same mind that entered. Ever notice how some insights feel like they were forged, not found? Still thinking about what you just heard? That's not an accident. Subscribe. Let what's waking up in you keep unfolding. For some, this passage through inner fire feels like static turned up too high. Waves of information with no form, memories resurfacing without invitation, emotions with no storyline. For others, it feels like suspension. Time bending, perception softening, reality loosening its grip. What's happening isn't dysfunction, it's a threshold. The psyche is brushing up against the edge of its own design. And at that edge, reasoning doesn't hold the key. Presence does. This isn't a moment for analysis. It's a moment for transmutation. The fire doesn't discriminate, it clears what's exposed. So if the surface is tangled with defense, chatter, or urgency, that's what it meets first. But if stillness is allowed to settle, the fire shifts its nature. It moves from destructive to clarifying. Without the noise, the architecture underneath begins to reveal itself. Raw, intact, honest. And that revelation? It doesn't need to be understood to be real. When was the last time transformation asked permission from logic before it arrived? In the aftermath, the mind may feel scrambled, fragments too loud to process or too quiet to hold. Some thoughts vanish mid-formation. Emotions come forward raw, unfiltered, as if internal boundaries have gone translucent. That's not malfunction, it's refinement. The fire continues to do its work even after the visible moment has passed. There's no need to manage it, only to remain close enough to internal quiet that the recalibration isn't mistaken for collapse. This isn't erosion, it's shedding. And soon, when the celestial corridor closes and the cycle shifts forward, what remains will reveal itself. Not everything passes through fire intact. That's part of the design. What stays is what aligns. What burns is what no longer matches. And the version that emerges, more distilled, more honest, is the one that carries forward. Ever wonder how often the real message goes unheard? Not because it was faint, but because the room was too full of echoes to catch it? There's an overlooked truth about subtle transmission. The message doesn't depend on force, it depends on resonance. Some signals don't break through by volume, but by precision. And during this alignment, a rare bandwidth opens, one not accessed by intensity, but by stillness. It's like a deep frequency field coming online, but it only responds to internal quiet, not performance quiet, actual spaciousness. No curated affirmations, no mental rehearsals, no background static of planning or explaining. Just vacancy, intact enough for reception. The irony is that the most sought-after clarity doesn't arrive through pursuit. It arrives through interruption, of noise, of mental velocity, of the assumption that something must be said to connect. And if it feels like presence is trying to get through, that's because it is. Not newly arriving, but finally unobstructed. Ever wonder how much guidance goes unnoticed? Not because it wasn't offered, but because the channel was never clear enough to let it land. Communication from the unseen doesn't enter with sound. It moves more like current, felt, not spoken. This isn't about language, it's about resonance. The veil doesn't lift with volume, it parts with openness. During this alignment, the cognitive machinery pauses just long enough for deeper impressions to seep in. Not concepts, but pulses, images that flicker, sensations with no source, thoughts that don't feel native. The mind becomes porous, less a speaker and more a receptor. That's the window. And in that space, something begins to step through. Quiet, patient, already there. But it doesn't compete with noise. It waits for invitation, not demand. Some call this intuition, others call it guidance. But labels don't matter as much as attention. How often do transmissions get missed because the question kept repeating while the answer was trying to arrive? You're not here by mistake. If this felt like home, it probably is. Subscribe and stay where the deeper truths live. Today isn't about chasing echoes. It's about tuning into a quieter frequency. The task isn't to fill the space with questions or demands, but to open the inner chamber wide enough for something long, waiting to settle in. Not all messages arrive as declarations. Some come as whispers beneath the noise of thought, a tremor in a déjà vu, a sudden pulse in a dream, a subtle nudge ignored too often. Those presences aren't new visitors. They've always been woven through the backdrop of experience, waiting for the moment when reception isn't clouded by noise. Tomorrow brings a shift, one that won't shout, but will feel close enough to recognize without explanation. How often do signals go unnoticed? Not because they're faint, but because the mind isn't still enough to receive. Creation has rhythms, moments to forge and moments to become the container. This phase flips the familiar script. While many rush to script futures, chant intentions, or push visions forward, the true power now lies in stillness, not momentum. It unsettles because conditioning insists that action propels manifestation, that volume begets results. But this isn't about pushing, it's about pausing, a sacred stillness, like the deep breath before a shift in tide. This quiet is the catalyst, not the noise that usually demands attention. And here's a question worth pondering. What might unfold if the next move was simply to become still enough to hold space for the unseen? Today isn't a moment for casting wishes into the void. It's about clearing the inner space so the subtle instructions can flow through unfiltered. Manifestation happens not by force, but by resonance. That shift can unsettle those accustomed to steering every spiritual detail because it demands surrender instead of control. Silence becomes the conduit, not the construction site. The mind, when busy sketching blueprints, misses the blueprint being woven around it. What's being planted now is quiet, a seed set beneath the surface, nourished by trust, not noise. It's a moment where the future's architecture takes form silently, outside the realm of effort or declaration. How often do the most profound creations arise from what was never spoken aloud? Forcing clarity only disrupts the current's natural course. Today invites a different posture, one of receptive stillness. Instead of wrestling with intentions, allow the vision to approach unbidden. Recognition often arrives through the body first. A subtle tremor, a sudden warmth, a sense of unfamiliar familiarity. It might be a tear slipping without explanation, or an instinctual pull towards something yet unseen but deeply known. What if the mind's rush to understand actually veils the very truth it seeks? How often does the body know before the mind can catch up? Tomorrow offers an invitation to emptiness, not as loss, but as opening for something genuine to take root. Silence here isn't a void, it's the weight of presence waiting beneath the surface. In a world demanding constant proof, explanation, and reaction, this moment suspends all those compulsions. It's not merely an astrological marker, it's a cosmic breath, a pause woven into the fabric of frequency itself. Within that stillness, something deep and timeless stirs. Not the ego's voice, not the mind's plans, but the core self that predates names, timelines, and dreams. This ancient part holds the memory of purpose, the wisdom of release, and the quiet certainty of direction, even when the conscious mind remains unsure. What might happen if that knowing finally led the way? If this message found its way to you and you're still here, thank you for holding space with me. If the content resonated, feel free to subscribe and stay connected as more reflections unfold. Your presence here genuinely matters. And if anything stirred within, an insight, a feeling, a memory, drop it in the comments. Sometimes one sentence from someone else becomes the exact signal someone else needed. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and if it feels aligned, subscribe to keep journeying deeper with us. There's a paradox at the heart of this moment. Clarity can't be summoned by thought or spoken into existence. It's a feeling, a return to something pre-verbal that awakens only when the internal clamor ceases. Silence is not absence. It is the channel where truth flows back into form. Tomorrow, the task isn't to explain, justify, or perform for understanding. It's to dissolve into stillness, to welcome the quiet as an old companion whose presence was overlooked. In that space, answers already reside, unasked yet present. They don't wait on effort or intention, but on receptivity. Trying to force clarity only veils it further. The moment unfolds not when action insists, but when stillness allows. The message isn't lost, it's arriving through the very quiet that many resist. So the invitation stands. Don't fill the silence with noise. Let the message land in the space you've cleared. And if these reflections have held your attention, gratitude for staying present. For those moved by this sharing, subscribing and engaging supports the unfolding journey. Feel welcome to share insights or experiences below. Until next time, embrace the silence and let it speak.